Okay, here we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of I Don't Know What I'm Doing with Friends. And this is a very, very special edition. It's the 20th anniversary, not of the show that is only a few weeks old, but a 20th anniversary of like a fantastic, incredible, outstanding report written by Gartner in 2001 called Customer Experience Management, a primer. And that's what it was. It was 46 pages. I know you don't remember this, Ed. 46 pages of which Ed wrote 45 and a half, and I wrote one paragraph. But we both took credit for it. So we both took credit for it. Just to give you an idea how long we've been talking about this stuff, Ed Thompson from Gartner, one of the three most brilliant analysts ever to be produced by the analyst firm, together with Scott Nelson and myself. But you know, Ed graciously agreed to come to this wonderful recording of this 20th anniversary special and discuss a little bit more about what is CX. So Ed, beyond what I destroyed about your reputation, you want to do a quick intro of who you are and what do you do?
So I used to work with Esteban. That's what you need to know. No, I joined Gartner in 1995. So and in fact, I looked up the other day, and I'm employee number 708 at Gartner. But I was more interested. This is why I looked up immediately after that, because someone said, "Yeah, but of 708, how many people are left?" So I looked it up, and there's of the analysts, there's something like 50 or 60 left, but many of them are now managers. So I looked up how many are in the front line still talking to clients every day, and I'm 12th longest serving Gartner analyst talking to clients face to face every day. Yeah. That's probably what you should know. Longest in customer experience, yeah.
And that's the longest in the CRM practice, also, right?
I think I am now, yeah. Now that Michael's gone and yeah, everyone's shifted off. So yeah, I think I'm the oldest.
We mentioned Michael, but we don't talk about Michael. Just
he'll be watching this.
Anyways, yeah. So this is what I want to cover with you. I mean, back then when we wrote about customer experience management, we said that customer experiences, and I don't remember the exact wording, but something about the aggregate of all feelings, sentiments, emotions, senses, blah blah blah, everything that happens that influences the customer, how they interact with the company, right? And that's outdated. That's outdated now, right?
No, it's pretty much the same. It's well, what I would say though, in fact, Gartner still has, it's not quite the same definition, but almost identical to that, the customer experience. But we split it up and had customer experience and customer experience management, because what we found was lots of people were saying customer experience, meaning the management of it or doing something about it versus what it was. And I think that kind of what we actually put together as the definition of it, kind of aggregated, it's a little bit different, but I would say it's almost essentially the same. What changed is the management phrase. We've sort of updated. In fact, we updated it this year at Gartner after a big 4-month argument. I think is the best way of putting it inside the company. So that's tweaked a little bit.
Is that because nobody cares about management anymore?
No, it's more how to describe it. So I think the way I describe it is there's a lot of analysts in Gartner covering customer experience. In fact, about 100 and something of them I've found. I keep track of everybody's name as they add and delete. And there's about 40-45 writing regularly. And there's only 2 or 3 things we can get everyone to agree on: is get everyone to agree on a definition, get everyone to agree on a kind of framework and some maturity model. Otherwise, everyone's doing their own thing. But on the definition, almost everybody comes in, looks at it, goes, "That's not bad," which is quite good. I view that as a compliment when they say that's not bad, because normally they come in with their own view and they go, "Yeah, I could live with that." So pretty much every analyst I've talked to can live with our definition or our variant of our definition from 20 years ago. So it can't be that bad if it's managed to the test of time. But the management thing, I think what happened there was we didn't really talk about understanding customers in the original definition of management. So we just talked about effecting change. We didn't say about listening and understanding. We didn't talk about culture. And sort of coordination type stuff. So we tweaked the definition this year just to kind of get more of the culture stuff in and more of the understanding customers in. So we didn't really cover that before.
So let me see if you sent me something earlier and I'm trying to find the actual definition. But
I've got it right here. I dug it up because I thought you were going to ask it.
So definition of CXM, the discipline of understanding customers and deploying strategic plans that enable cross-functional efforts, resulting in customer-centric culture that improves satisfaction, loyalty, and advocacy. Did I get that right?
Every word.
Wow,
I can say.
Dude, that's a buzzword bingo on its own by itself.
It is. Actually, when I wrote the first one, so I wrote the CX management definition when I got challenged by a bunch of people saying that's not it's not what the company's doing, it's what the customer's doing. When I wrote that, which was about 2009, I think the first one. What I did was I thought, I don't know what to use. So I went and looked up everybody's definition. So I gathered together something like 45 definitions. I looked PwC's up, I looked at Deloitte's, I looked up Accenture's, I looked up McKinsey's, I looked up Bain. So I looked at all the big consultancies, I looked at all the major academics, put them all together, and I kind of distilled it and just nicked words out of it and put it together and then tested it internally and published it. But this time I got a bunch of people who know what they're talking about, as opposed to just me. And they had some opinions, and so it improved. So, but it is a lot of buzzword bingo in there because we're trying to cover everything we could think about.
That's a way to say it. I'm okay with that. I mean, so the part that is more interesting is not the definition, because we can argue about this forever, and like, as you know, it's been argued forever, right?
Yeah.
But the practical approach to that. I mean, how are customers taking? We have these conversations when you go on site and you tell an executive team or a board, this is what CX is about. How do they react to that? Do they get what you're talking about, or do they say, no, it can't be that, it has to be something different?
10 years ago, quite a lot of negative reaction. In fact, I have to be honest. So in 2002 or 3, you and I have been talking about stuff, and I went to California and I met a couple of heads of customer experience, and I thought it was really funny because I like the concept, but someone having a job title I thought was ridiculous. And so I remember saying to one of them, you'll be fired by the end of the year with that job title. You should change your job. And they said to me, there'll be thousands of people like me one day. And I said, no, there won't. You'll just lose your job. And this is the dumbest idea. You should go back to being, because they'd previously been the head of marketing, and they sort of changed their job title. I said, no, go back to being the head of marketing. Anyway, she was right and I was wrong. And I had to apologize on stage 4 years later or something. But the point I was making.
Hold on, before we go too far. How many times have you been wrong, though?
Quite a lot.
Oh, damn it.
on CX, okay. I've been overly negative repeatedly. So other things I've done much better on, but CX, the thing I spend most of my time on, I get it wrong. So I'll give you another example. I wrote a paper which is something like 2008 market crash, financial crash. That's it. All the heads of CX are going to get fired now, because now we're going to get down to no. I started tracking. I was like, no, there's more of them being employed and appointed during 2008-9 than there were in the previous years. And I was like, wrong again. So I had to write, I got this prediction wrong again. So I was repeatedly too negative about heads of customer experience and people being appointed and having a job. And in fact, I was looking on LinkedIn this morning just to see how many people got to find with chief customer officer, CX, head of CX. He said, there's thousands. In fact, there's hundreds of thousands of people. I know you've got to watch out for the people working at Starbucks who say I'm the head of CX and they work at Starbucks. But taking that out and saying no, a board level, senior executive level appointments, there's bucket loads, like McDonald's a couple of weeks ago.
So then it is actually, I mean, this is a little bit, let's get past the buzzwords, but this is a little complex, right? It's not what most people expect to hear when they hear a CX definition. When I talk to clients and when I talk to people, they ask me and I say, look, it's really simple. CRM is about transactional relationships. CX is about interactions and not worry about the relationship. But that's in the opposite end of the spectrum. It's too simple, right? But you think people align with stuff that they think about as a strategic, cross-functional, customer-centric approach to ensuring satisfaction, loyalty, and advocacy?
Not all of them, but today it's 4 o'clock my time in the UK, and a bit early for you. And I've had 3 calls today with heads of customer experience, and that's exactly how they define it. And that's not our definition. They've got their own one, but it's all about enterprise-wide. Company-wide, so they actually really do. Their problem is making it happen, and so they believe in it. They've been appointed. They've got the boss backing them. They've got money, but they're trying to work out what to do. And it's actually really hard. It's not a. I think the reason is it's really interesting. Is it's really hard to do. If it was easy, every company would do a great job. And funny enough, we all know how we don't do a good job.
Why is it so hard to do?
Well, we did a bit of digging into this.
Well, I mean, let me hold on. Let me improve that question. That's a stupid question. That's a
hard question.
No, it's a stupid question. You can say, well, there's a lot of reasons. So, I mean, is it so hard to do because it requires a complete mind change within the organization, because of cultural elements, because of technology, because of data, or is it just a combination of this? Or like it changes for every company, of course. But what's the most people find hard to do about that?
It's a combination of all those, but the main thing is culture. It's people. It's mindset. It's not tech. It's not strategy. It's not listening to customers. It's not metrics. It's not budget. It's not senior backing for the chief execs. It's changing people's attitudes and opinions and stuff. And everyone says it's all about cultural type stuff. And there's a bunch of companies who don't have a head of customer experience who do deliver great customer experiences, and you go and interview them. And they've got amazing cultures. You sort of walk in and you go, these guys don't need anyone in charge because everybody's already got it. And they really, and they indoctrinate people when they come in. And if you don't fit in, they spit you out, basically. So there are companies like that, but often the founders are still there. I think they're the chief exec is in effect leading the whole damn show and making it happen. So
but then the head of the customer experience is the person you bring in when you don't have the culture to become customer centric.
I would. My rule of thumb is 95% of the head of customer experiences are appointed internally, well, the ones that survive anyone do well. There are now some who succeeded and been brought in from another company because they've failed another. But I'd say most of them are internally appointed, politically well-connected people who've been around a bit. They know lots of people, and so they can get on with lots of people because they've got to cajole and nudge, and they've got to prioritize between different departments, which means saying no to some and yes to others, and lording it over some departments and escalating. So they have to be really good politicians. The other data point I love using is, in my early findings, when I went around meeting people, everybody was female. Every head of customer experience was female. And even today, I think I've been keeping track the last 18 months, and 70% of the heads of customer experience are female. All three I met today were female. And one of the reasons I think that's true is I think men were too cowardly. They thought that's not good for my career. They were like me. They were like, oh no, that's a terrible thing. Quick, don't do that job or get fired. I think women were braver. Now all the experienced ones are female. It's quite interesting. And that's one of the rare executive positions that are female where men outnumber women substantially. I still think that's true.
What's the tenure of a chief customer experience officer, or whatever the title is these days?
Well, a lot of them don't make it more than 18 months.
Okay.
That's fine. But the ones who get past that, I've talked to people who've been in situ 10 years, but I think a lot of people get burnt out. It's quite hard work. So I think more people voluntarily quit after about 3, or they get asked to rotate out after about 3 years. So I can think of, I can go through a whole bunch of companies where the person was there for 3 years. They said, I've done my time, I'm handing over the baton, and the handover, someone else takes it. Okay. It seems to be there's a 3 or 4 year cycle for a lot of people where it's just really tiring and really hard work and tough.
And when that happens, is the continuation of the CX model, or is it like the new person comes in and says, I mean, you mentioned before, it's politically and culturally sensitive place to be. So usually politically means somebody comes in and they need to go and slap the biggest guy in the yard, to prove themselves, and then put their entire team in place. And that takes 6 months, a year, and then you have 6 months to a year to get something going. I mean, is there a continuation in this?
There is. So it's interesting. If you talk to someone like Intuit, who are quite famous for having had something running for 15 years or more than that, 20 years, if you talk to them, they keep spitting out heads of CX into other companies. They get headhunted. But in effect, what happens is the person running it going to get headhunted away, and then they promote someone up. So there's almost like a steady stream of new heads of CX coming out of that company. So good continuity. And I would say good continuity, if you talk to... who was I talking to the other day? Big life insurance company. You talk to these companies, I think the track record on continuity is better than chaos, where they leave and a new big hitter comes in and changes everything. Because I think actually the core team basically stays. The head changes, but the core team that's in place, and they're not big, these teams. They're averaging 12 people. They basically are pretty long lived. Actually, they're pretty good if they've managed to survive the first 18 months and prove their value. I think it's actually getting past the first 18 months, 2 years, where the finance director says, what are we doing? Why are we spending this money? What are we getting for it? If you can't answer that question 2 years in, that's a problem. And so I think it's that surviving that bit. But the continuity is quite good, actually, weirdly enough.
So being conscious of your time, and I know the job at Gartner implies being on time all the time. So we have only a couple minutes here to finish this and wrap up.
I have to go.
Okay. Well, so what's the value? How do you prove that value? I mean, I can answer the question quickly. We invested $100,000 in buying software, and we got to reduce our cost, by X percentage in customer service. So there's your ROI. but that's worthless. I mean, an ROI calculation like that is worthless when it comes to experience and effectiveness and all that. So how do you actually measure the value of CX and the effectiveness of CX?
I'm going to give you two answers to that. So one answer is a kind of an oblique one, which is it was a little data point I stumbled across about 3-4 years ago, which was, and it's still true. And in fact, I looked at a study yesterday. I think who did it? Customer Gauge or Walker did it. But essentially, it was saying, oh, look, only 10% of companies can measure the financial ROI of their CX work. And we found that 3-4 years ago. But I think this is much more important. If you talk to the ones who've been doing stuff for 10 years, 70% can measure the ROI. And what I mean by measure the ROI is not, we can measure the ROI, nonsense. What I mean is, no, show me the money, where they can actually show you the money and they can actually prove it. And if you do a thing after 5 years, I think it's a 50%. So what you learn from that is the longer an organization goes on, the more they can prove the ROI. So question is cause and effect. And of course, my conclusion from it was, well, they survived because they learned, either they had enough time to be able to demonstrate the benefits, or, which I think is actually more, they actually survived several hits and managed to learn how to do it. And so they've managed to do it. But a lot of organizations don't get past that. And that's one oblique to it. But I think that, how would I measure it? I think my thing is, one of the things I'm very interested in, everyone's talking about total experience or human experience or the whole experience, all this kind of stuff, where you really talk about the employee and the customer. One of the things I find interesting is how often the companies who have great customer experience win prizes for great places to work. And there's a definite correlation there. You can see it over and over again. Not always true. In fact, there's quite a few who don't have that, but there's a heavy correlation between the two. So I think one of the things is, would I want to work there? Is one of the questions I ask myself. And I think that's often an issue, is that you can tell when people are enjoying working somewhere. I don't mean everyone's going to be happy all the time. I just mean that on average, people are looking happier and they feel like they're enjoying themselves and doing something good. Okay,
since you work yourself into that trap of correlating employee and customer experience, I mean, how about when you're trying to enable customer experience to be more automated, more like self-service, more self-purpose by the customer? Experiences are driven by customers, not the company. Companies can't do anything about it; they can only provide an infrastructure. This is all the stuff that I've been talking about, right? So, how about all this stuff? How do you correlate that with measuring? Like having to be a good place to work?
Dehumanize, make it all self-service. Actually, all the younger richer people want to do self-service. So, but until things go wrong, I think that's the question. When things go wrong,
that's right. I agree with you. I agree with you. Yes, I agree with you that sometimes things go wrong, but if you're trying to go to 60-70% that will work by itself and you don't need human interaction at that level, then how do you justify the investing on that other 30% versus that 70%?
Yeah, it's the service side of the experience. Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's I was talking to a client the other day, and our whole conversation was why we will not make everything self-service. In fact, they've gone too far towards service, and now they're backing their way off from it. And they had a kind of relenting. But initially, actually, it was working for them. They were getting better scores because they're doing good self-service, actually. But when they started to push it too far into areas which weren't naturally things you should move to self-service, it started going horribly wrong. They'd actually realized we've overdone this, and they're backed off. So I think every company has a natural balance somewhere. And the problem is, where is that natural balance? And some companies, by the way, the self-service stuff is 10%. And other companies, I think the problem is everyone tends to go on averages. They kind of go, all right, average, we should be able to get to 70-80% self-service. That's not true. And sometimes you can't get anywhere near that. It depends on how complicated your products and services are. The reason I say that is I was talking to a company yesterday, and we were saying, who has really good digital self-service? And I said, for me, the guys who lead in that are gambling companies and gaming companies, because everything they do is entirely self-service, but they make it really good and really easy. So then they're a different industry, perhaps, to banking or insurance or manufacturing.
You gotta extend that also to commerce and marketing and sales and everything else, because everything is automated, or everything should be automated, right? Marketing has become automated. You don't need somebody trying to understand what you want to give you the right content. You drive your needs for content, right? In e-commerce, you're playing a game and you hit a button and you just bought something, right? I mean, there's there's no human interaction. So it's not just service for the customer service perspective. There's like, more complex interactions that also become automated. So it's a question of automation, not as much self-service versus a human-driven or human interaction, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, and maybe that's a good place to start. I mean, we're coming up on the 20 minutes, which is as much as people can stand my voice on a video.
And I have to go to something else. But on the automation,
yeah, you do.
Automation. I'd say that is. I think it's, if you had to pick a top 10 trends, that's one of the big ones, is the automation thing. And I don't mean it's near real-time automation. So it's the accelerating processes to 10x the speed they were in the past, is the way I describe it from a company perspective, but processes. So one of the pieces of work I did last year was looking at 2 years ago. Last year was dead, but 2 years ago I was looking at what do the top 5% do differently, and what you realize is they're all really good on the customer experience stuff already. So what they're doing is changing themselves. And one of the things I found really interesting was they have a much higher chance they've taken a process and made it 10x faster than their competition. But usually it's one specific process that kills the competition, blows the customer's minds, not deliberately trying to wow them. It's not a wow thing. It's just oh wow, I didn't know. The customer does go wow, but they didn't expect it, and it completely caught them off guard. It's usually something like onboarding, or it's like a mortgage application, or it's getting a doctor's appointment, or it's something quite mundane that they've accelerated massively by changing the process quite dramatically. But that kind of blows people away. And the top 5% of companies, they're much, much more likely to have done that. It's taken one thing and just really accelerated it. And a lot of automation in there. Yeah. I better stop.
No, it's fine. You need to go. But I love these conversations. This is what actually Gartner is about. It's the best company in the universe to have this type of conversations. And
a lot of people doing this.
Problems.
A lot of analysts shouting at each other. Yes.
There's a lot more people now than there used to be back in the day. So, but
there's even more
Ed
shouting.
Ed Thompson, one of the brightest minds to ever, tread on the world of CX. Been doing it for many years. Thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure.
Very much for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And this was another edition of I Don't Know What I'm Doing.